Hey guys, what's up? It's Kevin Schroff, and today we're going to be Hackintoshing my desktop. So my motivation for doing this is because editing videos in Premiere Pro has become such a tedious experience for me because of the terrible editing performance I experience. All the footage I shoot is shot at 4K 30 FPS, and just scrubbing through the timeline at even 1/8 playback resolution is extremely choppy and slow. If I make proxies for the footage, it's a tiny bit better, but the overall performance is still pretty terrible in Premiere Pro. My desktop is equipped with an MSI 5700 XT, an i7 4770 non-K, 28GB of RAM, and a Samsung 860 SSD, amongst some other drives, so it's more than powerful enough for this type of workload. Compared to Premiere Pro, both DaVinci Resolve and Final Cut Pro are extremely smooth under the same circumstances. However, Final Cut Pro has a lot of plugins available for it, and the workflow looks more appealing to me, so I decided to dual boot with macOS in order to be able to use it. As I already have Windows installed and don't want to reinstall the installation, I resized my existing Windows EFI folder to 200 MB. This is necessary because otherwise macOS will complain and refuse to install on the same drive, as it expects an EFI partition of larger size than what Windows creates by default. I've also shrinked my main Windows partition and created a temporary 50GB exFAT partition, which I will then later format to APFS and use for my macOS installation. Since my XPS 159570 already dual boots macOS and Windows, I'll use it to set up the macOS installer USB for my desktop. Firstly, we should get a fresh copy of Catalina off the App Store. After that's done downloading, we can grab our USB, format it to macOS journaled, and then run the following terminal command supplied by Apple that creates a vanilla USB installer for macOS. This takes around 5 to 10 minutes, so in the meantime we can download some other files that we'll need. On GitHub, I found an OpenCore EFI configuration for a desktop with similar specifications to mine. We won't be using this just yet, as the 5700 XT won't work in output video until after the installation of macOS. For now, I've disabled the 5700 XT in the BIOS, so we'll be using the Clover bootloader and the integrated HD 4600 iGPU to get macOS Catalina installed on the machine. Once we've downloaded Clover bootloader and the macOS USB installer is done, we can continue. Loosely following the Hackintosh subreddit's vanilla desktop guide for Haswell desktops, I'll now install the Clover EFI bootloader on the USB we just prepared. After doing that and mounting the EFI partition of our prepared USB, we can move in some essential kexts that we're going to need. All Hackintosh builds will require virtual SMC or fake SMC. I'll also be placing the latest versions of Lilu and Whatevergreen to handle the iGPU. Another required element as of Catalina is SSDT-EC.aml. We need this SSDT because a plugin called Apple ACPI EC.kext depends on the ACPI device named EC, but most PC manufacturers don't name their embedded controllers EC, so this helps us work around that. Now we're ready to install macOS on the desktop, but before we do that, we should make sure our BIOS configuration is in order. Aside from temporarily disabling the 5700 XT, I also had to turn off Secure Boot and disable Fast Boot just for the time being. We're now ready to boot the installer USB. After hitting the BIOS key, we can see the drive in the bootable list. Now we're at the Clover bootloader. I'm going to deselect Inject ATI and also add -V to the boot arguments so that we can boot in verbose mode and I can see what's going on if it gets stuck. Okay, we've successfully booted the installer. I'll now format the temporary partition I created in Windows earlier to APFS. Now that that's done, we can finally begin the installation. Now we'll reboot the system and finish off installation. Okay, at this point we're still using the HD 4600 iGPU, but since we've got macOS installed, we can now fix the 5700 XT. To do this, I'm going to use an OpenCore EFI configuration I found on GitHub for a machine with similar specifications to mine. My system has an ASUS ROG Z87 Maximus VI Gene motherboard and a 5700 XT instead of RX 580, but it should probably still be fine considering that the GPU is handled by Whatevergreen and Lilu in both cases. And both Mobos are Z87, so as long as there isn't any Gigabyte Mobo specific changes to this configuration, it should just work fine on my machine. After downloading the OpenCore EFI folder, we'll now mount my SSD's EFI partition and then paste it there. I'll also grab the latest whatever green and Lulu keks off the internet, just in case the keks that came with the configuration are older. Some other keks that are included in this configuration are Apple ALC, which will handle audio, and Intel Mousy Ethernet, which will take care of the built-in Ethernet on my motherboard. I'm also going to increase the timeout time because it's too short for my liking. Now let's reboot and see if the 5700 XT works. Yes, we've successfully got Catalina working on my desktop. Now before we run benchmarks and compare performance of this Hackintosh to real Macs and itself under Windows, let's talk a bit about my experience running macOS on this desktop. On Windows, things like janky animations, random glitches, and hiccups are present even on a clean install and observed to occur in my experience independent of the hardware it's running on. The user interface is an unorganized mishmash of different design concepts. For example, throughout the OS there is this interspersing of even OS-provided applications based on Microsoft Fluent design and the traditional desktop-style-based user interface, creating this clashing environment of the new and the old. On top of that, these applications are often duplicates of already existing functionality, meaning we have legacy and current versions of applications that intend to do the same thing. The most prominent example of this is the modern UI-based Settings app and the legacy control panel. Both exist in the OS. Why? I don't know. They have a lot of feature overlap and intend to do the same thing, but at the same time, they both have access to settings and features that the other does not. Weird design choices and unexpected behavior like this permeate throughout the operating system. And the more of a power user you are, the more likely you are to notice these type of issues. macOS, on the other hand, feels a lot more polished in general usage compared to Windows. The user interface is subjectively more pleasing and objectively very consistent across the board. Not just in OS-provided applications, but across third-party applications as well. Smoothness is great and UI animations flow nicely and without lag or random hiccups, making the general experience of using the computer much more pleasurable. Productivity-wise, macOS has some features that Windows is either missing entirely or hasn't implemented as well. Features like continuity, handoff, better trackpad gestures, and a superior file explorer and global search function are really nice to have. On the other hand, I do miss the window snap by dragging ability from Windows, which can be added with third-party applications. Handling of audio is also inherently superior on macOS, with core audio having very low latency, compared to on Windows where you need to go and download a third-party driver like ASIO for All in order to achieve the same. Then comes the platform-exclusive applications like Final Cut Pro, which is so well optimized that on my XPS 15, it performs better with just the measly iGPU than Premiere Pro and DaVinci Resolve on Windows with my dedicated NVIDIA GTX 1050 Ti Max-Q. Absolutely insane, but it's true. A similar experience is found now with my desktop, whereby timeline and editing performance is leaps and bounds faster than Premiere Pro under Windows, and additionally also a bit faster than DaVinci Resolve. Now let's get on to the benchmarks. Performance should be roughly equivalent between the two platforms, barring any differences from APIs like Metal versus Vulkan and GPU power tables. But we're doing this benchmarking just to verify that the CPU and GPU are working up to spec, and to be able to place my Hackintosh's desktop performance between real Mac devices. First off, we have Cinebench. On Windows, we finish with a score of 1718 points. On macOS, we finish with 1760, so slightly higher, but within the margin of error. So the i7 4770 CPU is performing equally under both operating systems. The second benchmark we have lined up is Geekbench's CPU test. On Windows, we end up with a single core score of 942 and multi-core of 3758. Under macOS, we have a single core score of 947 and multi-core score of 3732. Again, similar CPU results under both platforms. Now it's time for the GPU tests. First off, we'll be doing Geekbench's GPU test with OpenCL on both platforms. On Windows, we get 73489, and on macOS, we get 53627. There's quite a sizable difference here in scores, but I was expecting Windows to have better GPU scores because under Windows, I'm able to undervolt and overclock the card with the Radeon Adrenalin driver suite. But getting the same undervolt under macOS is a little bit more involved, and right now I don't see this as something I necessarily need to do, as I game under Windows and edit under macOS. And now for the last benchmark, which is primarily GPU based, Unigine Heaven. Under Windows we get a score of 3277, and under macOS we get a score of 2344. Again, a sizable 33% difference due to the aforementioned reasons, and also additionally the fact that Metal API is not being used, and that OpenCL is deprecated technology as of Mojave in macOS. This concludes the video. If you enjoyed it and want to see more Hackintosh and tech content from me, give this video a like, hit the subscribe button, and turn on bell notifications to know when I've posted something new. Additionally, all the music used in this video was produced by me under the name Nivek4s, so if you'd like to listen to it, links are in the video description. Thanks for watching, guys.